She never expected that a single slap would reveal the kind of truth that shatters reputations, careers, and lives. She also never expected that an entire plane would watch it happen in real time, cheering for the wrong side until the moment everything turned upside down. What none of them knew was that the quiet woman they mocked had more power than everyone on board combined. The story begins with a question that should make anyone stop and think. What happens when someone believes they can judge a stranger's worth simply by the clothes on their body? What unfolds when cruelty goes unchecked? And how far does prejudice spread when it feels safe in a crowd? A crowded first-class cabin on a flight from Phoenix to New York became the stage for a lesson no one on that aircraft would ever forget. The lesson began the moment flight attendant Laura Kent, a woman known among her coworkers for her sharp voice and sharper opinions, leaned in toward a passenger named Amira Lewis and declared, with absolute certainty, that people like her did not belong in first class. Before Amira could respond, Laura struck her across the face. Not a tap, not a nudge, a full slap meant to shame her. The sound snapped the attention of every passenger around them. The shock left Amira, standing perfectly still, her cheek burning red against her deep brown skin. Someone gasped, someone whispered, and someone else lifted their phone to record. Laura snatched the boarding pass from Amira's hand and ripped it cleanly down the middle. Then she tore the pieces again and again until they drifted to the floor in tiny scraps. She pointed at the mess she created and told Amira to kneel and pick up her counterfeit ticket. The cabin fell into a chilling silence. At least 30 passengers watched. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked entertained. A few muttered comments that slipped out louder than they intended. Finally, someone shuts these people down. About time. They always try something. The toxic encouragement fueled Laura's arrogance. She stood taller. Her voice sharpened. She pointed again at the scraps on the floor and demanded Amira obey. But Amira did not move. She did not kneel. She did not defend herself. She only stood there with the sting of the slap still fresh on her skin. Laura mistook stillness for defiance. She accused Amira of refusing lawful orders. She grabbed her shoulders in an attempt to force her down. When that failed, she shoved her against the nearest seat and shouted for security. Each insult that followed became harsher, louder, designed to paint Amira as a threat, as a criminal, as anything other than a paying passenger who simply wanted to sit in her assigned seat. Phones continued recording. Views climbed. Faces twisted with judgment. A woman in seat 1C, an influencer named Sarah Blake, quickly opened a live stream and whispered commentary meant to make her audience lean closer. Her tone carried the false concern of someone who wanted attention more than truth. She described Amira as a scammer, a liar, someone trying to sneak in a luxury she did not deserve. Her audience number rose fast as comments poured in with startling cruelty. Drag her out already. She looks guilty. People like her never follow rules. Within minutes, the situation grew louder, harsher, and more hostile. A manager arrived. His name was Harold Boone, a man who displayed authority the way others wore jewelry. He listened only to Laura. He never looked at Amira long enough to see her expression or notice her calm. He saw her simple clothes, her worn shoes, her plain bag, and decided he needed nothing more. He asked for her boarding pass. She told him Laura had destroyed it. Laura laughed loudly, making sure every passenger heard her certainty that the ticket had been fake anyway. More passengers nodded along with the lie. Even those who said nothing carried the same expression. The expression of people who assumed they already knew the truth. Harold asked for identification. Sarah Blake's live stream viewers typed insults nonstop. An older couple muttered that they did not feel safe. Others just stared, waiting for the moment security would drag Amira down the aisle like a criminal. Amira's calm, in the middle of all of it, only irritated them more. Her silence made them angrier because it did not match the villain they wanted her to be. Security was called. 2 officers boarded. A third stood behind them with a hand resting on his belt. None of them knew they were stepping into a disaster that would soon reach national headlines. None of them knew they were seconds away from learning exactly who Amira really was. The officers questioned her. They repeated accusations fed to them by Harold and Laura. They warned her that she could be removed, arrested, banned from flying. Throughout it all, Amira remained still, firm, grounded. She repeated only that her boarding pass had been destroyed and she was being falsely accused. Her calm unsettled the officers, but not enough to stop them. Harold insisted it was a clear case of fraud. Laura added dramatic claims of aggression that never happened. Sarah's live stream audience exploded with excitement, urging the officers to remove the scammer. The tension hung in the air like thick smoke. Then something shifted. As the officers prepared to remove Amira, she slowly reached into her bag. Not for anything dramatic, not for anything threatening. She reached for something that would make every person in that cabin freeze where they stood. Before anyone could stop her, she spoke plainly with a steady voice that carried more weight than any shout in that cabin. I would like to show you something before you take me off this plane. It may change everything you believe about me. The officers hesitated, not because they believed her, but because something in her tone refused to be dismissed. Every phone lifted higher. Every eye widened. Every judgmental whisper fell silent. And the story everyone thought they understood was about to flip so hard that no one on board would ever forget what happened next. Amira's hand moved slowly inside her worn leather bag, steady and deliberate, as if she had rehearsed this moment long before the flight ever boarded. Every person watching held their breath. Even the officers, who moments earlier had been ready to arrest her, paused just long enough for doubt to slip through the cracks of their certainty. Laura snapped at her to stop. Her voice cracked with sudden fear she tried to disguise as authority. But the damage was done. The entire cabin sensed a shift, a subtle but undeniable change in the air. Something was coming, something none of them had prepared for. Amira lifted a leather portfolio from her bag and held it with care, as though it carried more weight than paper alone. She opened it slowly. The lights above caught the edge of the first item inside, and the flash of metal was bright enough to make the nearest officer lean closer. It was an identification badge, not flimsy, not laminated at home. Thick, embossed, official, the kind of badge that did not belong to a scammer or a liar. The kind of badge that belonged to someone with authority far beyond anything Harold, Laura, or even the officers possessed. The badge bore her full name, Amira Lewis, Chief Executive Officer, Monarch Air Group. Harold's knees wobbled. Sarah's live stream comments erupted in confusion. Passengers who had ridiculed Amira moments earlier stared like they had seen a ghost. Laura was the first to respond, though her voice no longer carried power. She sputtered that the badge must be fake, that anyone could print something like that. That Amira was just trying to manipulate the situation. But no one was listening to her anymore. Amira removed a second document. Thick paper, raised seal, golden emblem pressed directly into the page. Printed signatures from entire board of directors. Her appointment letter. A letter that named her the highest-ranking executive in the entire airline group that owned the very plane she was standing on. Harold reached for the document with shaking hands. His face drained of color as he read. As he looked again, as he checked the signatures a third time because his mind refused to accept the truth staring back at him, Amira did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply asked, in a tone so gentle it cut deeper than any shout, "Would you like to verify this with corporate before you accuse me again?" Before Harold could respond, before Laura could speak another lie, Amira tapped her phone, placed a call on speaker, and stepped back. A woman answered immediately. Office of the Chief Executive. This is Dana. Dana, this is Amira. I'm on flight 226. The crew believes my documentation is fake. Could you confirm my identity for them? Dana didn't hesitate. Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, you are speaking with the Chief Executive Officer of Monarch Air Group, the parent company of this airline. She is scheduled to attend a full board review upon landing. Any interference with her travel is a violation of internal protocol and federal aviation standards. The cabin fell silent. Not a single phone comment typed for a moment. Even the officers stepped back, as if distance would protect them from the mistake already made. Laura stumbled into a seat, shaking. She whispered apologies that no one believed. Harold covered his face with his hands. One officer muttered under his breath, realizing how close he had come to putting handcuffs on the woman who held the future of their jobs in her hands. But Amira was not finished. She reached into her portfolio again and removed a folder marked with bold black letters. Executive Audit. Discrimination Compliance Review. Dozens of papers filled it. Reports. Complaints. Witness accounts. Dates. Names. Patterns. Enough documentation to tell a story far bigger than the slap that started everything. She held up one page after another, reading aloud the incidents involving this exact flight crew. Incidents the airline had ignored. Incidents that no one expected the CEO to carry with her. A man in first class groaned when he saw his own name listed in a complaint. The older couple who earlier said they didn't feel safe lowered their heads. Sarah's livestream viewers switched from cheering the crew to condemning them in real time. Amira continued speaking, not with anger, but with clarity. Today's behavior is not an accident. It is a pattern documented, reported, and dismissed. And today, every person watching will see what that pattern costs. The officers listened without a word. They no longer stood as enforcers. They stood as witnesses. Then Amira's phone buzzed again. She checked the screen, and a faint smile touched her lips. The chairman of the board was calling. She answered on speaker. Amira, we've been briefed on the incident. We're watching the situation unfold. Are you safe? I'm safe, she replied. But your employees nearly dragged your CEO off a plane because they believed I didn't look like I belonged here. The chairman exhaled slowly. Everything is on the table. Every position. Every protocol. Say the word. Around her, those who had mocked her earlier now clung to their seats. Amira did not rush. She looked at Laura, at Harold, at passengers who had stared with judgment instead of kindness. Before I say anything, she said softly, I want to make sure everyone here understands the weight of what just happened. The slap, the accusations, the lies, all of it rooted in assumptions. Her words settled over the cabin like a tide, pulling everything inward. People were ready to watch me be removed, humiliated, even arrested. Not because of anything I did, but because of who they decided I must be. No one dared speak. Now, she continued, here is what happens next. She closed the portfolio, set it neatly on her lap, and looked at every face around her. And with one sentence, she began a chain reaction that would devastate careers, rewrite corporate policy, and reach headlines across the nation. I'm issuing formal consequences for every employee involved, effective immediately. The plane seemed to tilt under the weight of those words. The story was no longer about a slap. It was about power, truth. And the moment justice finally walked into the room, Amira let the final word linger in the air, and the silence that followed felt heavy enough to bend metal. Every person in the cabin understood that nothing happening now could be undone. Not the slap, not the insults, not the live stream, not the assumptions whispered loudly enough for her to hear. The truth had finally arrived, and it carried consequences. Harold tried to speak first, but the sound that left his throat was thin and shaken, nothing like the authoritative voice he used moments earlier. He stepped forward as if the extra inch could soften what he knew was coming. Ms. Lewis, I didn't realize. I didn't know who you were. Amira's gaze held his, steady and unyielding. That is exactly the problem, Mr. Boone. You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to treat me like a human being. His mouth opened, then closed again. No excuse he could form would save him. Before he could gather himself, Laura blurted out apologies through trembling lips. Her hands shook so violently, she pressed them against her skirt to hide it. Please, I didn't mean any harm. I swear I didn't. I was just following procedure. Amira tilted her head slightly. Which procedure instructs you to strike a passenger across the face? Laura's breathing hitched. She couldn't answer because the truth hung over her like a storm cloud. There was no policy, no rule, no training manual, only prejudice disguised as authority. Passengers who had stayed silent earlier now began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their eyes. Others turned their faces away, not wanting to be recognized on the live stream as witnesses who chose silence over decency. Sarah Blake kept recording. Her audience had grown so large that her phone's screen barely kept up with the flood of comments. The tone had changed completely. Gone were the cheers for removal. Now there were questions, accusations, outrage that had flipped sides. How do they treat her like that? She warned them, and they didn't listen. This is unbelievable. They all better be fired. Amira didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The tension hung on her quiet words as she addressed the officers next. You're moments away from taking me into custody. Tell me, officers, at what point were you planning to ask for proof before using force on a completely calm passenger? Officer Hale, the senior of the group, swallowed hard. His eyes didn't leave the floor. Ma'am, we acted on the information we were given. And who gave you that information? The question hung in the air, and every eye in the cabin turned toward Harold and Laura. Officer Hale sighed. They did. Amira nodded. Exactly. She turned back to Harold, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his own choices. Manager Boone, my office has documented complaints about your handling of passengers for well over a year. Complaints your supervisors ignored because the pattern didn't seem serious. Today, your behavior proved otherwise. Harold's face crumpled. He looked at the ground the way a man looks at the end of a long, well-polished career. Amira wasn't finished. She reached back in her bag and pulled out a final document, one far thicker than the rest. She held it firmly, letting everyone see the weight of its contents. While you were preparing to remove me, this case file was prepared for today's meeting. 42 documented incidents of discrimination by this very crew. All of them dismissed or buried. All of them ignored. Gasps spread through the cabin. Laura blinked in disbelief. 42. That can't be right. Amira did not soften the blow. It is exactly right. And each of those reports contains names, statements, and testimony. Many of them collected by passengers who believe your behavior was not an exception, but a routine. Laura's lips trembled. I wasn't trying to discriminate. It wasn't like that. That is what makes it worse, Amira answered. You didn't even recognize it. The phone in her hand buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then answered with a calm confidence that sent chills through the cabin. Yes, Chairman. I'll update you in a moment. I'm addressing the situation directly. Her tone made every person listening realize something unmistakable. This wasn't just an internal problem. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This incident was now circling the highest levels of the company and would soon crash into the public eye. Amira lowered the phone and looked at the officers. You'll not be removing me today. Instead, I need you to stay as witnesses. Officer Hale nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Passengers began whispering. Not gossip. Not insults. Shame. Guilt. Regret. Some looked horrified by their earlier applause when Amira was shoved. Others seemed afraid to be recognized for the comments they made. And in the middle of it all, Sarah's live stream carried every second to thousands of people watching across the country. What began as entertainment had become evidence. Amira folded her hands gently in front of her. The calm in her face contrasted sharply with the trembling fear in Laura's, the panic in Harold's, the shock in the officers, and the stunned silence of the passengers. I will now outline the immediate outcomes of your actions today, she said. Harold inhaled sharply, bracing himself. Laura shook her head slowly, as if denial could hold back the inevitable. The passengers leaned forward without meaning to. The livestream comments poured in so fast the phone nearly froze. But Amira did not rush. She let them wait. They had assumed her place. Now they would wait for her judgment. This incident will be addressed fully. But before I issue consequences, she said, there's one more thing all of you must understand. She stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying a force that no badge or rank could manufacture. You didn't treat me this way because I am the CEO. You treated me this way because you believed I wasn't worth respect. That belief is the real problem. And today it ends. The hush that followed was absolute. Everyone braced for what came next. And Amira began revealing consequences that would change the future of the airline, the careers of those involved, and the beliefs of every passenger who had watched it all unfold. Amira's voice remained calm as she continued, but the calm had force in it. It held the room the way a closed fist holds pressure. Every person listening knew that the next words would decide the fate of careers, reputations, and a whispered judgment that had filled the cabin moments earlier. "Let's begin," she said, her tone steady. "Since you were willing to strip me of dignity without a second thought, it is only fair that your actions are addressed with absolute clarity." Harold Boone stood frozen. His earlier arrogance had evaporated. His posture bent under the weight of what felt like an invisible verdict hovering inches above his head. Laura's breathing had become so unsteady it sounded like she might collapse. Even Sarah's live stream viewers, now in the tens of thousands, waited in a stunned hush. Amira turned first to Laura. "Your actions today were not a mistake," she said. "They were a choice. You struck a passenger. You lied about her behavior. You destroyed valid documents. You escalated a situation you created. And you believed the cabin would cheer you for it." Laura's lips trembled in an attempt to speak, but no sound came. "You will receive immediate suspension without pay," Amira said. "Your behavior will be reviewed by internal affairs. You will also be required to complete extended training on discrimination and passenger rights. Refusal will result in termination." A wave moved through the passengers. Some nodded. Some exhaled shakily. Others lowered their eyes in shame for cheering her earlier. As for Laura, her shoulders collapsed inward. She didn't cry. She simply folded beneath the truth of her own actions. Amira shifted her attention to Harold. "You led the escalation," she said. "You ignored my words. You ignored evidence. You reinforced false claims. You called security without verifying a single detail. And you instructed officers to remove me before gathering facts." Harold's eyes were glassy. His chest tightened with each breath. He had never imagined the day would come when the CEO of the entire airline group would stand over him with his job in her hands. "You will be demoted immediately," Amira said. "Your managerial authority will be revoked. You will return to ground-level operations under supervision. You will undergo mandatory performance review and retraining." Harold opened his mouth, but the words that left his tongue were broken. "Ms. Lewis, please. My family depends on my income." Amira looked at him with a steady expression. "You should have considered the families of those you mistreated before making assumptions about who deserves respect." He bowed his head, knowing there was nothing left to argue. The cabin remained utterly silent as Amira turned to Officer Hale and the other security staff. "You were minutes away from arresting an innocent passenger," she said. "You responded to accusations without investigation. You approached me as if I were already guilty. You acted on bias presented as fact." Officer Hale swallowed and nodded. "You're right. We should have evaluated the situation better. You will not be punished today," Amira said, "but your department will undergo a mandatory review. I will recommend new protocols to ensure security officers verify information before acting." Hale nodded again, relieved but still shaken. Amira faced the passengers next, and a ripple of discomfort spread among them. No one expected to be addressed. No one believed their silence could be part of the problem. "Many of you watched silently," she said. "Some of you recorded. Some of you whispered assumptions. Some of you applauded cruelty. This is not just a crew issue. It is a human issue." A woman in the front row blinked rapidly. A man in a suit shifted uncomfortably. The older couple who earlier whispered about not feeling safe now sat rigidly with regret on their faces. "When you see injustice," Amira continued, "silence is a decision. It is consent. It is participation." Her words were not loud, but they were unmistakable. Sarah's live stream viewers exploded in conversation. Messages poured across her screen, reflecting the shift of public opinion. "She's right. We all watch and do nothing. This is uncomfortable, but necessary." They treated her like a criminal because of stereotypes. Amira looked at Sarah. "You broadcast this moment to thousands," she said. "And in doing so, you showed the world how fast people judge. You also showed how quickly truth can overturn lies." Sarah lowered her phone slightly, a rare flicker of guilt on her face. "I didn't realize the damage I was feeding," she whispered. "I was chasing attention." "Now you have it," Amira replied. "Use it responsibly." The cabin exhaled as one. For a moment, it seemed the consequences had been fully delivered. Then Amira reached once more into her bag and revealed a final sheet of paper, a thick one with bold lettering across the top. Executive Emergency Action Notice. She unfolded it slowly. This document authorizes me to enact immediate emergency reforms when passenger safety or civil rights are violated, she explained. Today qualifies. Harold's breath caught. Laura's eyes widened. Even the passengers leaned forward without realizing it. Effective immediately, Amira said. The flight crew responsible for discrimination will be removed from duty pending full investigation. Replacement crew will board shortly. This aircraft will not depart until I confirm the safety and integrity of its operation. Gasps filled the cabin. Someone murmured that they had never seen a CEO use this level of authority firsthand. Others whispered that the live stream was going to break the internet. Amira wasn't done. She turned her attention to the speaker system and pressed the call button. "Corporate," she said when the operator answered. "Connect me to the board." A moment of static passed. Then a deep voice responded. "Amira, this is the chairman. The full board is listening." Passengers stared in disbelief. They could hear the quiet rumble of voices on the other end. Dozens of executives waiting for her instruction. Amira spoke clearly, with no hesitation. "Prepare to initiate a full-scope audit. Not just of this crew, not just this airport, the entire domestic network. I will not allow this pattern to continue under my leadership." A stunned silence followed. Then the chairman replied, "Understood. You have unanimous approval." That approval carried the force of a tidal wave. This was no longer a confrontation on a plane. It was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through the entire airline industry. Amira ended the call and turned back to the cabin. "We will continue shortly," she said. "Before we do, there's another matter that needs immediate attention." She scanned the faces before her. The cabin waited, breath held, hearts pounding. She had delivered consequences. She had initiated reform. But the next revelation would be the one no one saw coming. Not the passengers, not the crew, not even the people watching the live stream. Then Amira said the words that cracked the story wide open and pushed everything toward the final turning point. "There's one more truth you all need to hear, and this one changes everything." The cabin froze, and the full weight of what she hadn't revealed yet hovered over them like a storm ready to break. Amira held the attention of every soul in the cabin. Even the engines outside seemed quieter, as if the world waited for the next words to land. She let the silence deepen just long enough for tension to press into every chest. "The truth you all need to hear," she continued, "is not about me. It is about what your response today reveals." Faces stiffened. Some braced. Others looked away as if refusing to meet their own reflection. You were willing to believe the worst about a stranger because her clothes looked ordinary, because her bag was worn, because her skin was dark, because someone with a uniform told you she was a threat. Her voice remained steady, but it hit with the force of something undeniable. You believed that without evidence, without question, without pause. A man in a tailored suit closed his eyes as if he finally understood the shame crawling up his spine. The older couple who earlier whispered about not feeling safe now gripped each other's hands, their guilt written plainly across their faces. Even Sarah's camera lowered slightly, as though the live stream itself felt exposed. Amira continued, "If you can judge a CEO this way, imagine how many people with no power, no title, no protection face the same treatment every day. People who will never have a chairman confirm their identity. People who will never have a platform to defend themselves." Her words rippled through the cabin like heat through metal. "I came on this flight anonymously for a reason," she said. "Not to test you, not to trick you, but to understand exactly what my passengers experience when no one is watching." Officer Hale breathed out slowly. He wasn't being spoken to directly, but her words sat heavy on his shoulders. Laura's hand shook. Harold looked like a man piecing together the ruins of his former certainty. Amira lifted the final page from her folder, and the bold headline at the top left everyone stunned. Quarterly Passenger Equity Review. CEO confidential. the kind of document no one expected to see outside a private boardroom. "I was scheduled to present this report tomorrow," she said. "But since the evidence presented itself today, we will adjust." She scanned the cabin slowly, her eyes moving from face to face. This flight is now part of the report. A collective inhale filled the air. Every insult, every accusation, every shove, every assumption, every cheering voice, every silent witness, all of it was now official. Amira turned to the officers. "I will need written statements from each of you documenting what you observed. Every detail, every false claim, every time someone escalated instead of de-escalating." Officer Hale nodded. "You'll have them, ma'am." She faced the passengers. "You will each be contacted by the new Passenger Equity Office. You will be asked what you saw, what you heard, and whether you chose to intervene or stay silent." Murmurs rippled through the seats. Sarah's livestream comments exploded again. "Accountability. This is history. They're all part of the report now. The airline is changing right here on camera." A woman in seat 3A raised her hand hesitantly. "Ms. Lewis, I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. I was afraid, but I should have done something." Amira nodded gently. "Your honesty now matters more than your silence then." Another passenger spoke. "I judged you the moment Laura tore your ticket. I never even asked myself whether the accusation made sense. I just believed her." "You believed a story you were handed," Amira replied. "We all do that sometimes. What matters is what we learn from the truth." Even Laura lifted her head slightly, her face streaked with tears. "Ms. Lewis, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect to keep my job. But I want to say, I'm ashamed of myself." Amira regarded her for a long moment. "Change begins with accountability," she said. "If you are willing to learn, then there's a path forward. But you will walk it under scrutiny and under guidance, not authority." Laura nodded. It was the closest thing to hope she had left. Amira then addressed the entire cabin. "Because of what happened today, new policies take effect immediately. Every crew member on domestic and international flights will undergo extensive training. Every discriminatory claim will trigger an automatic investigation. Every passenger will be protected by a real, enforced code of rights." The cabin erupted into quiet applause. Not loud, not celebratory, more like the release of everything they had held inside. Amira raised her phone again and sent one final message to the board. "The audit begins now." She put the phone away, closed her folder, and looked around the cabin one last time. "I came here to understand my airline better," she said. "I ended up seeing more truth in 1 hour than most people see in a lifetime." She stepped back toward her seat. "Everyone deserves dignity," she said. "Every passenger, every crew member, every human being." A long, steady moment passed. Then the replacement crew entered, tense but determined. A new captain arrived, greeting Amira with a level of respect that came from sincerity, not fear. Passengers slowly approached her, not with excuses, not with flattery, with apology, with humility, with understanding they had not possessed 30 minutes earlier. And when she finally sat down, Amira exhaled quietly, not in relief, in resolve. She opened her laptop and drafted one simple message to her entire workforce. Change starts today. When the plane finally lifted into the sky, the story had already spread far beyond the cabin. Social feeds flooded with the truth. News outlets prepared breaking headline banners. Executives across the industry braced for reform they could no longer stall. Amira looked out the window at the shrinking city below. She had boarded that plane as a quiet observer. She left it as the spark for a transformation no one could stop. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this moment was not just justice for her. It was justice for every silenced voice who never had the chance to speak. The story of what happened that day would be told again and again. Not because of the slap, not because of the humiliation, but because of the woman who refused to bow when everyone expected her to fall. And because, in the end, she proved a truth the world needed to hear. Respect is not earned by appearance. It is owed by humanity.